you spent time in prison, man. So when you come out, you have a little bit of an uphill learning curve.
Right.
And for sure, you're struggling on how to send a text message. Because for like months, the only text messages I got from you were links to videos that you had made.
Yes.
And I was like, I feel like Matt's account may have been taken over by a bot.
Right.
So I went ahead and put you on a filter on a nice screen.
You're on a list.
Yep.
Yeah. You're just one of 30 guys on a list that get all the new videos. And I'm trying to get views. Like, I don't know how to do it. I make a video. Send it to
That's
everybody.
not the way to do it.
Yeah,
that's how you end up on a spam filter.
Yeah. Oh, I've had people call me and say, listen, stop sending me these things.
Yeah.
I've had people send me, I've had people that I've never texted. I've sent them stuff. And then all I'll get back is it'll say, stop. Because they think it's a bot. And if you send stop, it'll stop. I'm like, bro, this is Matt. They're like, oh, I don't know. You keep sending me these videos.
So that's all right. But that is exactly what happened.
Yeah. Well, baby steps. I don't know what I'm doing.
You clearly have gotten quite a bit better. And let's not fail to mention the fact, right, that you started by having some dude come out and film a sizzle reel that sounds like it didn't go well.
No.
So, dude, you've crossed the 100K subscriber mark on YouTube. You've got a beautiful studio here. Yeah, you got the plaque.
Sent a little plaque.
That's what I'm saying. Like,
which by the way,
there's a very small percentage of people who get to that spot. So you're doing something right. You're doing lots of things right.
I appreciate that. And the funny thing about this,
you're just not sending text messages right.
No. Well, the funny thing about that whole thing is that everything I'm doing right now is while I was in the halfway house, kind of scrolling through YouTube and looking at these different podcasters and stuff, is everything that I thought, how silly. Look at how silly this. Look, this guy did a whole video about getting 100,000. They sent him a little plastic plaque. That's just silly. Listen, I was thrilled when I got my plaque. I was like, bro.
I'm closing in on mine.
Oh my God.
And I know exactly. I'm like, oh, when is it going to happen? When's it going to happen?
Is the channel Everyday Spy?
Everyday Spy Podcast. Okay. Yeah. The Everyday Spy Podcast is the YouTube channel. And my Andrew Bustamante YouTube channel is the one closing in on 100K.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, Julian would not approve. Julian has convinced Danny to rebrand Concrete as Danny Jones.
Yep.
Which makes sense. I had heard that prior to that. I'd heard people on YouTube explaining how you need to kind of brand yourself. And so I had called mine initially like Inside True Crime, but then I've switched it. Then very quickly I switched it to Matthew Cox Inside True Crime. So because there are people that are watching videos where literally I'm talking for 5% of the video.
Yeah.
It's 95% the guest, but they're watching it. And half the comments are about me, and I said nothing. So I get it. People, for some reason, they get to like your personality. They like you. They follow you. They support you, which initially sounds silly until you really need that support. You know what I'm saying? And then you feel like, wow, you really start appreciating it. Where before it seemed silly to me until I was in that position where it's like, this is all I do now. So how I'd be a pretty big jerk to still think it's silly when I'm living off it and I do appreciate it.
Yeah,
so.
I think the word you're looking for is, silly is definitely the word that comes to mind, but what we're really reaching for is humble. It's a humbling thing.
Yeah.
To know that people watch you, to know that people can connect with you, to know that they can relate to you, and that when they hear your guests,
right,
they themselves are putting themselves in your shoes.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what I think is that's what podcasting has taught me. It's a humbling privilege to get to reach that many people.
No, privilege. It's not even, it's definitely privilege.
Yeah.
Privilege. Yeah. Well, keep in mind too, and I've told you, I think I've even said this to you, it was like 6 months before I left prison, like I was laying on my cot in prison thinking, how am I going to pay my bills?
So this is what's crazy about you, right, man? So there's a concept at CIA that we call the availability heuristic. Right? Heuristic is just a fancy word for cognitive bias, and cognitive bias is just a fancy word for assumption. But there's this heuristic that ties itself to availability because it basically means that you're always comparing yourself against the most similar thoughts, the most similar memories that you have that are of recent memory available to you, right? Availability heuristic. So for example, I was talking to my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law is my mother-in-law. So you fill in all of your own words there, right? She's almost 70 years old. And she's talking about like how she sees the world, but she doesn't realize that everything she's saying is her opinion. Right. It's not fact. It's just her opinion, right? She thinks that she's going to live to be 125 years old. And she thinks that she's going to live to be so old because, my aunt lived to be 105 and my grandmother lived to be 97. And, my aunt's grandmother lived to be 102, whatever else, right? And I'm like, all she's doing is listing people that fulfill in her mind her own desire to live to be old.
Right.
She's not even thinking about all the people in her life that died at 60, 65, 70. Right. She's for sure not considering statistically that most Americans don't live past the age of 90.
Right.
So she's leaning on what's known as an availability heuristic. She's immediately referencing the exceptions to the rule. And that's what she's availably pulling from. And that's the same thing that you're often doing when you're remembering your time in prison, right? You're reaching back to this very limited period of your time, of your life, where you
felt significant, but okay.
I'm sure it was very significant to you, but the significance that it was to you does not actually make it significant in terms of your capabilities.
Right. Well,
it was your awesome capabilities, let's be honest. It was your capabilities that made you come up with a crime that kept from being identified for so long until it was finally identified and you were, $12 million in?
15. But
not many people can steal $15 million and not get caught.
In fact, no one. If you throw me, then no one can do it and not get caught. But I was going to say the other thing is too, I'm also pulling from my own, because you basically are stunted when you enter prison. So I was pulling from my prior experience where YouTube had been out for 2 years. I don't think I'd ever been on it. There were no podcasters. Podcast was not even a thing. That wasn't even named. It wasn't even a name.
Yep.
So it was it was developed once I had been in prison for 2 or 3 years. I didn't know what it was.
Yep.
So, and the fact that people would become fascinated with criminals to a point where they could actually turn that into a living wasn't a thing. So my whole thing when I'm getting out of prison is I'm thinking, you're a scumbag. Everybody thinks you're a scumbag. They're going to have the only thing I know about the internet is they're very quickly going to realize you're a scumbag. What are you going to do? You're going to work at McDonald's. You're going to rent someone's spare room. You're going to be humble. You're going to be appreciative. You're going to keep your head down like that. These are all the things I'm telling myself. Then I get out and I realize there are guys that have been in prison 30 years getting out doing YouTube channels talking about prison stabbings and riots.
Yeah.
And they've got 500,000 subscribers and they're making a living doing this.
Well, when you first contacted me, I think the thing that really had stopping power for me was that you were super connected to these creative artistic endeavors. You were painting, you were writing. You had a blog that had just incredible true crime stories on it.
Oh, yeah, right.
That's where you were when I met you. And that was there when that spoke to me more than whatever criminal sentence you were given. Because, I mentioned this to you before, right? CIA officers, as much as we are also rejected and denounced by huge chunks of society, one of the few groups out there that we actually make friends with, that we actually connect with, are criminals.
Right.
Current and former criminals. Partly because the only difference between a CIA officer and a criminal is that what we do is sanctioned crime.
Right.
We're trained how to execute criminal acts and execute them on foreign soil to the advancement of American national security. Criminals have to go through the school of hard knocks.
Right.
Take a risk, take a chance, and they prey on usually other Americans.
Right.
Right. So there are differences between us, but when it comes to the mindset, the risk tolerance, the creative solutions to problems that nobody even faces, and for sure, questions that people aren't willing to ask themselves, right? You have asked yourself those questions. You have taken those risks, and you've also done your service for your time,
right,
for being caught and captured and for recognizing that you've had to change your life. But that creative element of you, right? The writer / painter / podcaster, that exists in all of us too. Former CIA officers, that's how we cope with the terrible things that we've done in the past. When we get a chance to separate ourselves from our acts, our operations, we oftentimes turn to the arts. That's how my company started too. I started by writing. If you like this short clip, make sure you click here to see the next clip or here to see the full podcast episode.